My name is Dan Garfield, and I do the I'm the chief evangelist for Codefresh. And if you're not familiar with Codefresh, we're really a CI/CD solution designed for people that use Kubernetes. And we've built over 3.5 million images since we launched last year. We have customers like ARM, Giphy, the GIF maker, which is why all of my presentations now feature lots of GIFs. HP is using us, and smaller companies like Family Search. I want to introduce our guest today. His name is Oren, and Oren is an expert in testing and machine learning. And I've nicknamed him Jeff Goldblum hair stand-in model because I love his hair. Oren, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, and I think might need to unmute you. Hang on, I'm sorry.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Start my video. Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Thanks, Oren. So maybe say a few words about yourself.
Sure. I'm the founder of and CEO of Testim. Testim uses machine learning and AI to accelerate the authoring, the maintenance, and execution of end-to-end and UI testing. I've been building products for developers for 21 years, focusing on developers. And I think in the last 6 years, I've been focusing on the test automation. It's one of the biggest challenges that I have to say that after doing a lot of stuff, I think this is the biggest challenge I've faced. I do a lot of community, like I really like to help the community. If people know about Selenium, and I started a lot of meetups, both in Israel and now in San Francisco.
No, thank you, Oren. So I noticed just looking at the polling information ahead of this, that about 64% of the audience is doing UI testing today. So hopefully we're going to be able to add to the expertise there. And for those that haven't done it, hopefully we'll lower the barrier to entry. And then of the audience, about 38% isn't really planning on using Kubernetes. The rest is in some stage of adoption with Kubernetes. And so hopefully there's something here for everybody. So I think that'll work. Now today we're going to start off, we're going to go through sort of the benefits and challenges of UI and end-to-end testing, how it works. We'll talk about how we can do it better with machine learning. We'll talk about how we deal with microservices, and we'll do a demo where we actually kind of put all this stuff into practice and show how it can work end-to-end as part of a sort of change management strategy. So Oren, can you tell us why we need testing?
Of course. So first of all, I think that there's a few things that change. Everyone knows that we need testing, but it's getting more critical in the last few years as we see that software is eating the world. And you used to go to banks, now it's getting to be online. Like everything, every operation, even the one that you thought would never become digitalized is getting digitalized. Everything is moving to either your phone or your desktop, and you need to make sure that it works, because if you went to the bank teller and he said, no, I don't know, I can't let you in right now, you would go elsewhere. So it's the same with if you're using an app. So you have to make sure everything works, because bugs really hurt your business. And then, as people know, there's different types of testing. There's unit testing, integration, end-to-end, and I love the gift that you added. But it shows something very important, that unit testing are amazing. We all love unit testing, and if you don't, then this is a great thing. But it's not enough. You need to make sure the entire system works, and it works end-to-end. So that's why we have end-to-end. On the other hand, end-to-end is hard, and everyone knows that, the maintenance, and we'll talk about that more, I guess.
Yeah, and especially as we've introduced the idea of microservices, it's gotten more complex. So hopefully we can make that a little bit easier. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about that's really critical, we find is crucial, is shifting left. And maybe Oren, you can go a little bit about the cost changes that happen with shift left.
So yeah, so it's what they found out is is the sooner you find bugs, and the cost of fixing them is smaller. So like, let's take one extreme. If you find a bug in the requirement stage, then it could be like takes you like few hours and you fix the bug, and then you say, okay, we fixed it, and now let's go move on with the other stages. If you take the to the extreme, on the other hand, like production, that's going to cost you a lot to fix. If you talk even the more extreme, like hardware, it costs you billions of dollars to do recalls. So it's, with software, it's a bit better, but it still costs you a lot more. It can take you weeks instead of a few hours, a few minutes. So there's a trend, it's called a shift left, because we have those stages from the requirement, design, coding, etc. We want to go as left as possible. And within every step that we are, every stage, we do want to go as left as possible. So even when we're coding, we want to find that in the early stage of this cycle and not just before releasing.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of what that kind of looks like, if you imagine a typical kind of Git workflow where you have sort of your master branch and you break off, you have sort of a staging branch, and then you have a feature branch. Shifting left basically is saying, let's move the line where we're doing the testing. So like if you're not doing any testing, then it's happening in production. It's all the way to the right. It's all the way over here. But then, you know, people add a little layer of testing. Maybe they get staging in and it moves left a little bit. But going to this graph up here, that's expensive. It's expensive to make changes there, and it slows things down. Or even at the pull request, a lot of people don't actually do the testing before the pull request. So they'll have code reviewers looking at code that's not even been tested really beyond maybe basic unit tests.
And they'd have to fix that again. Like they have to fix and then you have to do the code review again.
And it's incredibly expensive. I mean, engineering time is the most expensive thing basically in any organization these days. So in order to really lower the cost of making changes, shifting left all the way would be every time I make a commit, basically I get this sort of end-to-end testing. So you may decide what's right for you and your organization. There's certainly an infrastructure cost associated with testing earlier. However, you save a lot of money on productivity, you save a lot of money on engineers' time, and ultimately they're able to churn out higher quality code more often, and you're able to deploy more often. And so this is sort of the promise of shift left.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to, actually, when you think about it, you don't even have to test everything on the commit, maybe just before the pull request, but at least have something that tests right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, well, yeah, you'll strategize a little bit on which tests you'll put in, because you might have like if you've been working on a feature for, you know, you've done 27 commits on it, and you get to the end, you think you're done, and it turns out that you actually made a mistake early on. You know, you'll have to go back and, so, you know, the further left you can get, the higher the productivity gains, but you're going to be balancing them against, you know, the time of getting the change and the test completed, et cetera. So anyway, let's move forward. And you actually ran a survey on some of this stuff.
Yeah, we wanted to see how many people, we do that every 6 months, and we want to see where people are at right now and where people want to go. So it was 100% that everyone wanted to be not just shifting left, they wanted to be continuous deployment. They wanted to commit the code and push that, have everything tested automatically. Everyone wants that, but we saw that only 2% of the people can do that at the moment. We have only a few customers, like and a few people, companies all over the world, like Facebook, Google. Those are the ones that actually are complete continuous deployment. Most companies are still not at that stage. They want to be, but they're not. They're kind of stuck in the middle. And I try to take this graph and like the answers, the polls, actually put it in a graph. So it's gonna look, you can see more easily, like where do people stand, and then you see if you have the laggers on the left, the one that release every 6 months or year. Usually the traditional manual testing is over there, and the one on the far right side are actually the one with the continuous deployment. And And most people are still in the middle, releasing once a month, have some automation, but the cost of automation, they don't have everything automation, and the maintenance is killing them. So they find it hard to get to the continuous deployment. We call that chasm, crossing the chasm.
Yeah, the chasm. Yeah. So, and I think that the big thing here is that the reason that people get stuck on this chasm is because some of this stuff is hard, especially traditionally, where there are things that prevent you from getting over that chasm. So a lot of what today is focused on is how do we solve those things in a fairly straightforward way so that the people that are listening to this video can go and cross that chasm. And we have some data on the reasons that they haven't been able to cross the chasm. And maybe I'll talk about the first one, is that they don't have an appropriate test environment, and they don't have the right data to test with. And so this is something that we can actually solve with some Kubernetes, some Helm, and some stuff that you're going to see in a few minutes. We can solve that problem actually in a few minutes and get over that. But then some of these other things are more related to the testing itself.
Yeah, you can see, and what we showed here is that from the World Quality Report is that it's still a bottleneck. You can still see that even though it was the year from 2016 to 2017 crossed, people are still, they thought this is a big challenge, and I think now it's more urgent for them to become shift left and be more continuous deployment. And what I try to do next is actually take those challenges and actually try to fit it on the graph and see what state of the company, what typical challenge do they have, and we actually find interesting things. So the first challenge, like the ones that are actually lagging behind, they're usually, they find it hard to actually find the people with the correct skill set, like finding good hires. That's challenge number one, I guess, for every company, right? And then the second challenge is like authoring the test. It's not easy, and everything is asynchronously when you're talking about UI testing. So that's the challenge number two. You wrote a few tests, but then you started seeing the challenges of the data initialization. I'll give an example just so the audience would understand what we're talking about. Imagine you work at Amazon and you want to make sure the add to cart works. So you have an empty case and you add the empty cart, and you add something to the cart, and then you make sure the cart has one item. If you run this again, you run the test, you authored it, you run this again, it fails just because there was already a cart over there. So you have to empty it. You have to get the dashline initialization. Just a very simple example of how a test that even once you wrote it, now you have to make sure you have the correct data initialized to have the test passing. And the next thing, the challenge that I see people are using that and people are seeing is the UI, the maintenance. People always think about, oh, it's hard to write tests, but the maintenance is even hard. Every time you change the UI, the tests break because it's reliant. It depends on the UI. The UI is actually the API. So every time you change the UI, and we do that like 5 times a day, like everyone does that in today's like agile world, they do that 5 times a day, you break the test. So you have to maintain that. So people don't get to write new tests, or they're stuck in maintenance, and they're maintaining 30% of their time they're using maintaining their existing tests. So that's crazy. And this is something that prevents them from going on. And when you're going to go continuous deployment, then you have those all fits in, and you want to be super finding the root cause analysis super fast, understanding everything, what happened, and do the authoring even faster. But most people are usually stuck even before even getting to continuous deployment.
Yeah, good point. Now, this is where we wanted to come in and introduce some of the machine learning elements here, and this was a lot of new information for me. So, Oren, I think this GIF explains it pretty well, but maybe you can explain to us just additionally how machine learning is going to help us solve some of the challenges with UI testing.
So the problem, the challenge is that all the tools, the great tools like for example Selenium, their premise is that you have one locator, one way of actually finding an element, whether it's a class, an ID, a CSS selector, XPath. It doesn't matter which one, but it's only one thing, and you always change that. It doesn't matter which one you choose, because you probably change that. People change the text, the class, the ID, and there's always a friction between the usually the QA team and the developers. The QA is always asking for the developers, oh, can you give me a unique identifier? So I know exactly how to pick this element and click on it. And the developers keep saying, no, we can't. I don't know. And it's going to change. We can't guarantee that this would never change. And it does change. That's the problem. So I think the solution actually comes with, let's get this premise of one locator out the door, and actually let's start looking at different parameters, just like a human does. A human doesn't just look and says, oh, it's the pink button. It says, oh, wait a second, it's a pink button. It has some text. I know it has some type, and it has some class and idea. I look at all the different parameters a developer before choosing the locator. So if I think what's great about AI is that AI can start and looking at all those different parameters, like having this thing called fuzzy logic, and doing a statistical analysis and actually making sure you're clicking on the right element, even though you change one of the parameters. So you're looking at all the different parameters. There could be hundreds of them. We're showing an example of something very, very simple that has only like few parameters, but usually you have hundreds of them. And if you change one of the properties, you can still say in very much confidence, AI can say, this is the same one. Just as it can write the cars, autonomous cars, and you can write cars and say, or looking at different photos of a person saying this is the same person, we can now say, AI helps us to say, this is the same button that was earlier. And that reduces the maintenance big time. And I think one of the jumps is that you can have multiple hundreds of locators, and actually you can try to improve it as you run your test. The more you run your test, the stable they get, because then you can see whether the ID was a random generated ID or not. The AI can figure it out and say, oh, the ID keeps changing, so I'm not gonna listen to that. When you think about it, we do that as well. If you have two friends that are actually recommend you movies all the time, if one of them hits the jackpot and you have the same flavor, you're gonna listen more to him than the guys that actually gives you a bad that suggests bad movies. I don't want to add some spoiler here, but I've seen bad movies lately. So so AI can do it exact same thing, and just and solve the maintenance. So I think this is where we're going to having the UI test being the maintenance is going to be done with computers, and as we go along, they're going to even author the test. I think in the future, I think in the even near future, I would say that people would authoring the test will be done by machines. You'll connect to production, and you'll see exactly what your real users are doing. Like think about it, it's like the best thing that can happen, not because the test will be written automatically. It's because it's been written by what real users are doing.
Yeah, and I love the idea of how the AI here is basically trying to pattern match like a human. And if we go back to those challenges that people had, lack of good testing approach is one. Difficulty of reusing tests is a key factor that prevents people from getting their testing done. And then even like slicing the test activities. And then even part of it is just writing the tests. And in this case, one of the reasons that I wanted to integrate with Testim and invite you guys over to do this webinar with us is because I recently ran a straight up, I did an integration with Sauce Labs, which provides an awesome Selenium test grid. and I had to create the tests as normal using just Selenium testing. And I found that process to be somewhat frustrating and a little bit confusing because I had to set up test scripts. I had to check those changes in. And then I had to figure out like the right logic, and then, just testing to make sure that thing was working was kind of frustrating. Whereas I found that this process was very straightforward. And then at the end of it, it was very easy to actually migrate and have things change. But anyway, let's move forward, and we'll introduce the demo application that we're going to use to demonstrate how this stuff works. This is an application called Voting App, and I'll just show you what it looks like really quick and explain a little about it, and we can end this poll. Thank you, poll. And we can share those results. There you go. Now you can see the poll results of what people are doing today. Okay, so get this out of the way. If I look at this application, it's basically just a simple voting application where I can say, do I like cats or do I like dogs? And I'm a dog person, so I like the dogs. It'll record my vote, and then it has a different page to view the results. And even though this is a simple application, it is a very modern style application, and so it's perfect for what we're doing. It's actually made up of 5 different services. So you can see that the voting app that I was interacting with was Python. The results were Node.js, and then it uses Redis to actually do the messaging queue, and then it has a .NET worker that records things into Postgres. And so it's sort of overly complex. But your applications in the real world, they are complex like this. They are made up of lots of microservices. So doing just the unit testing on one component, it's not going to be as meaningful as something like what a UI test that we were just looking at. And one of the reasons that I use this example, and I've added all the code on GitHub, so you're welcome to grab it and pull it down and check it out, is that I've packaged it into a Helm chart. And if you're not familiar with Helm, you're not familiar with Kubernetes, Helm is basically a package manager for Kubernetes. So I can package all of these applications, which are basically containerized applications that are designed to run on Kubernetes. I can package them all as a Helm chart, and it's going to make the shift left process a lot easier, because if we go back and look at this challenge, the greatest challenge for people was lack of an appropriate test environment. And if we think about what Helm is going to do for us, basically I can spin up a one-off instance of my application. Think of it as a staging server that I can set up, install my entire application on, run all the testing against it, and then throw it away when I'm done. And this is going to be scalable for lots of engineers making lots of changes. And it won't waste any infrastructure dollars, because it basically only will use the environment for as long as it needs it. So this is the application we're going to work with. And this is sort of the flow that we're going to demonstrate today. We're gonna commit a change to the test app that I just showed you. We'll have Codefresh is going to take care of the pipeline work for us. So it's going to build the images and the Helm chart automatically, basically the package of the entire application. It'll deploy all of that to a one-off environment, and then we'll throw Testim against that environment, which is sort of a form of Selenium testing. But we've added on the machine learning aspect to it. And once those tests pass, it will deploy to production. We have an optional step to sort of validate production. We didn't add that in today. And then we're going to record all the metadata for everything that happened, so that we have visibility through this whole process. So in this case, Testim is going to handle our machine learning, our UI testing components. Codefresh is the pipeline that's going to take our changes, get them tested with Testim, record the results, deploy to production, all those things. So it's the pipeline. It's actually storing our images. So it's got a built-in Docker registry, those components. So let's go into sort of the machine learning component. And as we do, just a reminder that on your Zoom, there is a questions button, and you feel free to add questions there. And once we get through these demos, we'll go back through and we'll be answering those questions for you. So let's get into creating tests. And Oren, I think this is your cue to share your screen. So let me open that up to you. And you should be able to share your screen now. There you go.
Okay. Thanks. So we want to write some tests, right? And Dan asked me to say, look, I wanna see how easy it is to write tests using the AI. And so he showed me the flow that the app uses, and I wanted to show how easy it is to do that. So let's start with saying where we want to go, and we'll start with we have the voting URL and we have the results URL, right? We want to make sure that the number that the results that we have a new results after we click that cats or dogs. You chose a dog, so I'll choose the cat one. So I'll start the URL. So we're starting to record the flow. The first thing that I do, and he would try to challenge me, like how would we get the value out of the screen and then go to navigate to another screen, click on the cats, and then navigate again. So I said, sure, why not? So let's start by making get the value out. So let's extract the value that's going to be out here. So we extracted the value. Sorry, Dan, move you. So we extracted that to a variable. So and let's call that user votes. So and the next things that we want to do is we want to go to the second URL and we want to vote. So let's vote cats, just to spite Dan. And then we want to go back to the results URL. And now we want to validate that we have enough that it worked. So I'm going to go to validations. There's a lot of different types of validations, whether you want to show want to validate the element is on the screen, validate the text, you want to validate the pixel validation, like the font and the size. So I'm going to go to basic text and want to validate that we have the number that we wanted. So when I'm going to run this, I want to make just 2 small changes. I don't want to have a hard-coded value. We want to make that dynamically, like the number, the value that we extracted from here. We extracted 39 votes from earlier. And we want to change that so that validation will not show 39 votes. It would show, I just want it to have, instead of 39, I'll do just parse int. And I'll use this user votes that we extracted earlier. So just make sure it's I extract the number +1, because it's higher in 1, and it's going to say votes. So now I know the value that I want to. And test it out. So it's gonna open a browser, start with resizing, open the browser that we want, get the value, go click on cats, and now we got 40, and it's gonna run the validation and make sure it works. So my JavaScript might suck, so I just want to make sure I wrote this correctly. Parse int user votes +1. So we'll see an arrow. That's the nice thing. If something fails, you can get an arrow. You can see exactly what happened, whether it was something that you wanted or not. So I can see unexpected string. Oh, I need a plus. Thank you. Very nice. I'm going to run this again. Sorry, guys. We would prefer to write everything dynamically. Write everything dynamically, show you how easy it is. So it was 40, clicking on cats, 41, and the task passed. So, but this task could have been much easier, by the way, if every time we started, we'd had 39 votes. So even those extra steps that we did, it could have taken us a third of the time. And this is where I think Dan and actually in Codefresh can really help out in actually when they give you the same, you can set it up to have the same initial environment super fast. So your testing is faster and easier and more consistent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that my cue? That was my cue. All right. So what I loved about that whole process was just how easy it was to create the tests and how smooth it was. Because like I said, I had done this with just plain Selenium and found it somewhat challenging, even though, you know, I'm a full stack engineer, like, okay, now I got to go learn this Selenium thing. It's just another thing to learn. And setting this up was really, really fast. And ultimately, it's actually a much better test because it's more valuable.
Yeah, but can I show something?
Yeah, please.
So we have, of course, screenshots on every step of the way, and that's really happening after root cause analysis. I think the interesting part is if you look at just look at the cats and let's open I'm going to drill down. It's something that you're not supposed to. You don't need to do that. But I want to show you the AI thing and show you that even that's very simple app, very simple. It has like 4 buttons. It had so many properties. So when we needed to find that cat button, there was a lot of properties that we looked at, and there's the reasoning behind it, and we said, wow, we found it, and actually we found all the attributes that was associated with that button. They were okay, and we found them all. So this is so even if something changes, like they just say you change some of the properties, you're still going to find that element, and that's the nice thing about it. I know that you loved that it was so fast, but I know that you appreciate it more than this test will not fail next week or next month when you change the test.
Yeah, so that's actually kind of the demo that we're gonna do. So I'll share my screen now, and we'll jump into that. Let me see if this is all. Share my screen. All right. So what we mentioned a second ago is in sort of this flow. Now that we've created the tests, we can actually execute on this pipeline that we talked about. So we will make a commit. Codefresh, which is the CI/CD platform, is actually going to take that commit, build it, build the images, build the Helm chart, and then deploy it into the one-off environment so we can run the tests against it. And I'll show you how the code actually works for this, the coding element of this, and we'll show how this application actually works. So now it is time to demo the pipeline. So let me, first what I'll do is I'll kick off the change, and then we'll go and look at what it's actually doing. So let me open up my terminal here, and I've decided that I want to change the name of the name of the option instead of doing cats, because like I said, I don't really like cats, and so I prefer that people didn't even have the option. I hear that goats are in fashion. People are starting to do pet goats, so we're gonna change it to be that. Get rid of, let's say
goats are cool.
Out, goats are in. All right, let's push that. All right, so this will go and kick off my build here automatically now that I've done my git commit. So I'm going to go into Codefresh, and we'll see that this commit will start. So while we're yeah, there it goes. So what we're doing here, Codefresh is like I said, it's a continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment platform designed for containers, for Kubernetes, for that kind of infrastructure. And you can see I've got a bunch of repositories connected here. These are all different repositories inside of GitHub. This is the application that we're working with. I have a built-in Docker registry where all my images are going to be stored. And then I have my integrations for Kubernetes as well as Helm. So these are all Kubernetes clusters and namespaces. I can actually see what's deployed in all of these things. And if I look at my Helm releases, what you'll see is this application that we're working with, I have a prod version and a staging version. Now, normally I would tear down the staging version automatically, but I've actually left it intact to make this demo easier. And if we go and look at production here, these are those services that I talked about that the application is made up of. They're all exposed here, and we can see their status, that everything's currently running properly. I can also see a whole history of the changes that have gone out, as well as a diff, and I can actually issue rollbacks. So if there was something in production that I didn't like, I could actually roll back right away without even making any git changes. And if you're familiar with Helm, some of this tooling will make a lot of sense for you, but if you're not, I'll sort of skip over it. We can see the endpoints that we talked about, so we can actually see where this thing is currently deployed. My change hasn't made it quite yet. It'll be there in just a moment. So let's go over and look at my build, and we'll see it's now building a test image. So let me show you kind of what's actually happening in this pipeline. First, it clones. Oop, it's going to auto scroll. Let's not auto scroll. What this will do, first it will clone the repo. It will clone all the code with the changes that I just made. Then it will build all of the images concurrently. So I mentioned that this is a Helm chart, and this is a little bit off the topic, but it actually is made up of 5 different Docker images. So I have a step here that's going to build the ones that I need concurrently. So you can see it only took a minute to build all my Docker images. I have some optional steps that I've disabled. Man, it's jumping around. Stop. Moving too fast. I have some optional, I have an optional step that I've disabled for this that could take my live data from production and actually load it into a test instance. I've turned that off here. And then here's where it actually deploys the chart into what I'm calling staging. It's actually a one-off environment. And I can have as many of these as I'd like to have. I can have lots of them in parallel. It grabs the endpoint where the IP, where this thing is actually deployed. And then it builds, these 2 steps are optional for working with Sauce Labs. And here's where it will actually run the Testim components. And you can see here, this is the output where it started a batch, it ran 1 test, that test was successful, and then it passed some variables out where now I can actually calculate the results and capture the results of those tests, and then I can deploy into production. So I'll show you what that looks like, but before I do, I just wanted to go and look at the image that was created. So this is one of the images that I built, and I've put on additional metadata here. This is sort of a report of what's going on, and we can see that I'm the one that created this image. I can see that there's a Testim report here, and I can actually see the commit shot of what actually changed. So we can see the change that I made right here. In order to create this image, I changed the cats to goats, right? So this is really valuable for sort of auditing what's going on, end-to-end understanding. And we can see that 100% of the UI tests have passed at this point. So if I pull open Testim, I'll actually be able to see the tests that I had right here. So here's the test. And if we look at this, click vote, it'll show that previously it saw cats, but now it sees goats. And if I look at the change here, it'll show that there has been some change to this target element. And in fact, it's been looking for this text cats. It didn't find it this time, and it's normally found that it's been reliable. But because these other elements are all here, it was able to find the correct element and click on it, and it was still able to count everything that it needed to count. And then we get, all the results of what we expected. So we'll see that the vote count went up, except I'm looking at the wrong place probably for the vote count.
By the way, I'm still amazed that in one day you've managed to explain Testim better than what I've been doing for the last 4 years. Thank you.
You bet. Well, it's very easy to use, so I enjoyed it. So this gives us kind of all the information from a pipeline and infrastructure level about what's going on. And then we've got the full logs of how this thing came to be into production. And if we go and look at our production instance, so we have the prod here. If we actually go and look at the vote, we will see the successful rollout completed now goats versus dogs. So now we've got that done. Good. And I can give a vote for goats. I'm fine with that. So this kind of shows you how this all comes together. And now let me show you the code that I used to do this. Now I built this integration myself just basically yesterday, because I'm a procrastinator. This is the Codefresh pipeline. And you can see I can have multiple pipelines associated with a repository. In this case, it's set up to build basically on every commit. Here's the environmental variables that I use. Some of these are encrypted. So like I have a Testim token in here that I'm going to use to talk to your API. And then the triggers right now, there's only one set up to go based on every branch. Any branch name, anytime I make any changes to this, it'll run this pipeline. And I could add different triggers. So if one of them might be like a registry change. So if I did like a push up into a registry or like a base image change, like the image I'm building off of changed, I could have it trigger this pipeline. Or I can set up a cron job, which will reoccur to run this pipeline. In this case, Git is golden for what I want to do. And then I can put all of my Codefresh YAML into my repository. So it would actually be in my repo. I've left it here in line for the sake of ease of looking at. This pipeline is actually fairly generic, but I wanted to show how Testim actually works in here. So let me skip forward. So here's Testim. And basically all I do is I call in the Testim Docker CLI, and then I pass in a couple of environmental variables. And then I execute the default Testim command, and I export that to a variable and then everything after this is all just about parsing the test results. Now, this is to make it look nice, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't actually have to have that. I could get rid of all that, and when the test passed, it would move on down the pipeline, and if the test failed, it would kill the pipeline and stop it from rolling out further into production, and I would get a Slack notification.
So that was for the link you wanted, like the link for the results to link Codefresh directly to that testing batch report.
Yep. So this is basically all of this work here is to pull out the variables so that I can operate with them. And one kind of note about the Codefresh pipeline. This is a custom step where I pulled in your Docker image. Actually, every single step inside of Codefresh actually runs in its own container. And then it's all connected by a data volume so that I can pass information between steps. So calling in the Testim Docker CLI is just calling the image and then executing steps against it. So very easy to work with. So this is what let me self-serve an environment. Let's look at that step really quick before we come back. If we go back over to my deploy step, I have a deploy using Helm. And basically, I just needed to pass in the name of the release that I wanted to do and the Kubernetes context, which is stored at my account level. And then I set some custom variables on my chart that I wanted to override. And I told it to do this only when I'm not debugging. So if I were debugging, I could disable that. So this is how this whole pipeline comes together. And if I can come back over here really quick, and we look at the issues here, the lack of appropriate environment and data, this is something that Codefresh can solve with the automation. But the difficulty of reuse tests across sprints, the lack of expertise, these are things that Testim is especially good at solving. And with all of that being said, let's see, I think this is all, hopefully this is all clear, but I think we can move to the Q&A.
Awesome.
So a couple of questions, and I'll leave the share up here, and I'll also turn on a poll. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll to ask you just for some feedback on this while we answer questions. So one of the first questions that I saw was, and this was for you, Oren, can I reuse these components for other tests? So you set up a test
Oh,
sort of for that page. Can they make sort of generic components and reuse them?
yeah, sure. Can I borrow the screen and share my screen?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. And we'll take about 10 minutes for questions before we sort of shut down.
Yeah. So it's actually very easy to reuse. You select a few steps, and then you say, oh, I want to group them together and reuse them. Let's say vote cats, let's call it, vote something. And it's create a group. The group now comprises all those steps, exactly like an extracting method. And now I can reuse that either in another test, or even in the same test, I can say vote cats, and now I can reuse the same thing again and again and pass in parameters. For example, imagine you have a login step, then you would like to pass in a different username and password every time. So it even makes sense. You also have like data-driven, you want to run the same flow several times, again and again. You can literally also add a loop, so you can run a loop over that. But I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. That's phenomenal. So let me put that as live.
Yeah, I'm sorry this was so fast, but it's actually easy. So
no, it was great. Then there was a question about Helm as a package manager. What is it exactly? And just to double click on that, I know that we're mixing sort of testing stuff and infrastructure stuff and CI/CD stuff. Basically, when you want to deploy to production, you do need to build a Docker image, which is going to contain sort of the what of your application, but then you need also a Kubernetes configuration. So basically saying, this is the image that I want to deploy, this is how I want to deploy, this is how it networks with other stuff, and that configuration is what's being handled by Helm. So it's a package manager, a lot like, apt or deb or npm or whatever, except it's for Kubernetes applications. So it will actually handle your configuration, etc. Let's see. And then there was a question, and I'm not sure I understood this, but maybe you will, Oren. These screenshots increase our project size, right? Is that something specific to Testim? Does that make sense to you?
yeah, we don't save the screenshot inside the Git version control. So there's a lot of, you're not limited by the number of screenshots or their sizes, so it's not gonna affect your version control. But you can still, don't worry, it kind of mirrors the tree that you have in Git, in your Git. And usually you have GitHub integration, you have those really keeping that mirror down. So you don't have to worry about that. You get as much as screenshot as you want.
Great. Then there's a question on, can these tests run on Sauce Labs? And the answer I know is yes.
Yeah, actually, so can you go back to you were saying where you called Testim from Codefresh? Oh yeah, can you show the screen?
Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen, and I know that if I go over here to where I call Testim,
and then you'll see a host and a port. Like, wait a second, where is it?
Here's run Testim.
So you see host and port. So you can paste in the host and port for Sauce Labs. Usually, you also need to pass in a key. But you hold, like, I like that the fact that Codefresh has a full integration. So yeah, if you go to testing docs, perfect.
I noticed that there was
there's actually a page. If you search at the text box for Sauce Labs, you'll get a full exactly. Yeah.
You can actually pass in the Sauce Labs key and grid information, which I thought was super cool because there's a lot of advantages to using Sauce Labs for all of your UI testing. So
exactly. So you have Sauce, browser stack, your own. If you want something, you need a ton of everything's taken care
of. There is another question here. Why should I prefer Codefresh over Spinnaker? And that's actually a great question because Spinnaker is a CD solution. It's not a CI solution. So in the case of Codefresh, we're actually handling this whole pipeline of stuff that needs to happen. So this stuff, Spinnaker is great at like just a simple deploy, but not all these other elements. So this is sort of bringing the entire platform, the entire experience of your CI and CD into a single pane of glass. That's one reason. Another is that Spinnaker isn't designed. It was created before Kubernetes and Helm, and so it doesn't have the built-in sort of first-class integration with Kubernetes and Helm that Codefresh does. To deploy to Kubernetes using Codefresh is very, very easy, and you get your full dashboard of like everything that's running. You can see everything that's running, and you can see what images are actually running because it's designed specifically for the problem of how do you build, test, and deploy into production Kubernetes and containers. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. There was a question for you, Oren. How do you test them?
Actually, we test them with Testim. Wait a second. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going back and forth with the screen sharing.
Sure, I'll stop share. Go ahead.
But I can literally show if I can go to Testim. There's a few different projects that I just need to remember the name. If I remember correctly, I can literally, we have hundreds of tests in each project, depends on the project. And usually you can see the number of tests being run. We have 1,000 tests being run today. Usually, even when you see the name of the branch here, we run our tests on every commit and push. So every time you run it, you say, I think I'm done. It's going to run the test with like parallelization, like usually depends on the parts and how many tests, but with high parallelization. So you can see that the duration is usually very, very low, like 3 minutes, the 18 seconds for some of them. I think that the biggest one is under 10 minutes. I think, yeah, this is it at 10 minutes. But we run everything. This is just the test that's being run today by the developers. Nice thing is to see reports that you can literally see how many people have run, how many tests have they written, what's the worst test and where should we focus on. We have lots of those. So we definitely, of course, we use unit tests and etc. But we do our end-to-end testing with Testim.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and then coming back. Oh, whoops. How do I pull the screen? Anyway, we have time for maybe 2 more questions and then we'll need to end. One of the questions was, are we using OCR to capture the UI screen?
Are we using OCR?
Yeah, OCR, I think.
Yeah, we look at the DOM. We also take the screenshot, but we look at all different properties. So we can, at the like the HTML that's been generated, we look at those properties. So we don't have to take the text out using OCR. We literally use the text. We only use the pixels when you do a visual validation. You might want to make sure it's not just the number 42 votes, but I wanted to make sure that it's aligned to the right, and I want to make sure that it's a specific font. So some people care about that. So that's another type of validation. There's a few types. One of them is visual validation that uses the pixels.
Gotcha. And there was a question, how did the AI assign relevance to different parameters from a single run? So like if we run it one time, it's going to assign some relevance. How does it guess and sort of create that relevance score, even though it's only run one time? It hasn't been trained over thousands of iterations.
The nice part is that we had millions of run every month. We have a lot of customers that's been running and they're sharing just not the information, but just the scoring, and specifically on which locators are good and bad. So we have a lot of information, and that we know, for example, that Ember Action ID or React components. We have a lot of knowledge out of those. We know exactly to begin with. We know a lot of frameworks, and we see that what is stable and what is not. So if you're using React,
so in a sense, it's basically learned from all of the other Testim
exactly
data. what elements are typically reliable and using those as sort of.
Exactly. So if you're using Angular, React, Vue, Ember, those kind of frameworks, then we know we have a very, very good starting point.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, so this is actually a great question. There was a question about mobile automation being supported. I see that the answer was yes. So that was just in the chat. And then let's see, maybe last question before we end here. How can we validate SOAP REST web services? So that's Testim, I think, is focused on UIs. So what about APIs? Is there a solution for bringing?
Well, of course. Last screen share and that's it. And then we have to go. We're late. So testing, you can add API. Let me just close that. You can say, I want to add validation. You can add API action. And let's give you API validation. Probably very similar. You can add everything. You can use those variables that you use everywhere. Like we use user votes. So we use those. So you can use that when sending information in the header, the URL, etc., or save that into a variable. So yes, the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. All right, well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and end. So just a final plug, if you go to codefresh.io/events, you can see all of our other upcoming webinars, as well as replay all the webinars that we've done. We will have a follow-up blog post with this video and our slides and links to the examples and documentation for how to do this with Codefresh and Testim. I believe will be up on Testim today or tomorrow. So you'll have that option there as well. And with that, thank you so much. I hope this was valuable. Please leave comments, send feedback to me. I'm at @todaywasawesome on Twitter. And there is a poll here where you can give additional feedback. Tell us what else you'd like to learn about. We love to do webinars. We try to do about one a week. And so we're planning out the schedule for the next few months. So please, if you want to learn about something and you want us to cover it, tell me and we'll go and make the video and hopefully you'll love it. So feel free to share the replay with friends and colleagues and coworkers. We really appreciate it. We do this education from a Codefresh and a Testim standpoint because we want to give back to the community, but also it's a chance for us to show off the stuff that we built. So we're thrilled to do that. So hopefully you'll share it and like it. And I feel like a YouTube guy. Hit subscribe. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day and look forward to sharing the replay with all of you soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.